And welcome back, everybody. We are on to Unit 5 already. And just as we've done so far in this first half of the semester, we're going to go through individual organizations so that as a future security manager, you understand what they do and how they support you and how you support them. And then we're going to try to fit them into the ESRM model. And then this week we have a discussion due and some reading due. And it's kind of an interesting discussion. There's no right or wrong answers. It's really your opinion about why you think certain things might work and not work in your future security practice as a security manager. So let's talk about information technology. And I know we have a number of people in the course who are cybersecurity majors. I hope you find this to be interesting and maybe a peek into what awaits you on the other side of that curtain when you start into those real jobs. So what do we hope to learn this week? Well, we're going to look at the basic functions of IT, or in some places it's called business technology, or some places just referred to as digital these days. So, you might work for the digital department or the IT department or the BT department. There are a number of names for it. It's all about the same thing. We're going to talk about how these functions might impact you as a security manager. When I say security manager, I do mean organizational, physical, industrial security manager. If you are a cybersecurity major, you probably have to hang up that hat and look at this through the eyes of the guy on the other side of the fence this week. But that's good to look through a lens of someone else and to get a perspective on how you are perceived in some cases. We're going to talk about convergence a little bit, and I'll define that in just a second. We're going to look at the physical risks that might be unique to the IT function, and there are many. I think that there is this misconception among some business leaders even that when we talk about security and IT, we're thinking about firewalls and we're thinking about passwords and we're thinking about things that are totally digital, and that is not the case necessarily. And then we're going to fit that IT department into our ESRM family and see how they can add value to your overall ESRM program, and a program that really protects against the risks that are unique and focused on your organization or business. In the first bullet point here, well, these are a few caveats. Okay, there are some limitations when we look at this. And the term "your mileage may vary." Some of you may remember big push in TV advertising on cars where they had to put the mileage that you expected for a while. I don't know if it's even a thing. It may just be in the fine print now, but it used to have to be a major thing in a car ad that this is what you would get in the city and this is what you would get on highway. And it always said your mileage may vary. I don't think anybody ever got that TV mileage because they were driving in optimal conditions on a flat road, no snow, under 40 miles an hour all the time. So your mileage may vary. In other words, you may see different things when you get out there. And that's true with all of the things we're studying here. Every organization is a little bit different. No two are built exactly the same. But what I want to give you is that overview so that you feel confident when you go in that you have the basics. We're looking at IT in this unit as an enabling function, not a core function. So I use Microsoft there. Any technology company that sells technology is their core business, right? If IT is your core business, if you are Cisco, if you are Hewlett-Packard, if you are Microsoft, technology is your core business. And those jobs in those companies could be coders and software developers, those types of jobs where the function of the company is IT. In our conversations, because there are many, many, many more companies out there that are not tech companies than are, even though you hear about the big, the FANG companies, if you will, the Facebook and Amazon and Netflix and Google, although Google is now Alphabet, you hear about those companies all the time. They make up a very small population of the available workplaces, if you will. So we're going to be looking at IT as an enabling function. Mostly those are jobs like making sure that the network is available and it's secure, and that you provision the different software and make sure it's loaded properly. Desk side support jobs, even things like printer teams, right? Those are very technical teams. They don't sound exciting, but actually they perform a huge function for our economy. And so we're looking at IT as an enabling function. So the companies that we're kind of talking about, and the job places we're talking about, are not the tech companies that many of you may want to work for. but they are the average company that has an IT department that is an enabling function. And then the term convergence, which we'll talk about in a second here, where your IT and your organizational security department, especially your cybersecurity and organizational, become one organization. You'll hear that talked about quite a bit when you get into the industry. It's not really as popular nor as frequent as you might read in journals and magazines. And I'll tell you why, and I'll give you my own personal feeling on it, which may not jive with what your other professors in both the organizational and the computer science department may feel about convergence. But I have my own feeling about it as someone who's worked in the industry, and I'll share that with you. And again, your mileage may vary, and that will be just my opinion. So when I say it's my opinion, it is just that, and everyone has an opinion about convergence when you're in this field. And convergence is a concept whereby the physical side of security, the organizational side, merges with cybersecurity, and they have one security organization. And it's been argued forever that that's the way to go because they're both security, and I would counter with they are not. Right? The term security was in some ways co-opted by the by the cyber side. That's not a bad thing, right? It was probably the closest term to use. But realistically, I truly believe that in an enabling function, cybersecurity is really cyber integrity. You're making sure that your stuff is not compromised. And that's not really security in the classic sense. When I look at security, if I secure something, it may mean that I can't touch it and use it. Whereas you can't do that in the cyber world, right? So the gold from Fort Knox is secured, right? A lot of it, from what we understand, may be at West Point, but it's around the country in places, and it is secured, and we don't need to touch it, right? It is the backbone, even off the gold standard, it is still the backbone of our economy. It has use, even though it is totally secured. In the cyber space, if you totally secure something, right? If there's a piece of software that you want to make sure is totally cyber secure, well, then you just, you put it on a disk and you, or a thumb drive or whatever, and you hide it somewhere. You can't totally protect something and use it at the same time. And in the cyber world, you are protecting things that must be used on a day-to-day basis. Makes it a little bit harder, quite frankly, to do, but is it security? So that's just kind of a rhetoric kind of a argument to tell you where my head is on these things. But when we talk about convergence in organizations, the problem is that most cybersecurity people don't have any organizational security background and vice versa. So you're going to put in a leader and sometimes a leadership team that really are generalists and not specialists, and in some cases you need those specialists. And that's to find someone who is, both gifted in cybersecurity and organizational security is rare. I mean, extremely rare. Now, from what I understand, the Department of Homeland Security is doing just that. Their head is now someone who is, gifted on both sides. But again, that's the exception, not necessarily the rule. Okay, I think, in my opinion, convergence is an oversimplification. And if you look at other fields, criminal justice and industrial security, I can't tell you how many times you go and you look at jobs in industrial security and it says, or you could have a law enforcement background. There's very little crossover between those fields. Yes, we both do investigations, but most cops aren't great at securing a building, right? I mean, we talk about securing a building in the long term, right? They can secure a crime scene, but that's because you just put tape up and you put people around that tape, but you can't keep them there forever, right? A long-term security plan, most cops aren't good at that. And the same token, most industrial security people are not great at de-escalating situations. They don't have that type of training necessarily. Or firearms, use of force, those things that are unique to a police job, right? There's not one better than the other, but they're just different. So you be your own judge, but convergence is something that you will definitely hear about in the workforce. Convergence of IT and physical / organizational / industrial security is something that you need to be aware of as a security manager, and either advocate for or advocate against in your particular case, wherever your organization is. But you will hear about it, and I wanted to bring it up in this conversation because I think it's just something at the forefront. But in our conversation, we're more concerned about adding to that ESRM family to get a more holistic look at our organization, to look at the risks from each of our major functions and some of our minor ones, if that's what it takes, right? Making up that team to determine what the risks really are to the organization. So we're not just throwing up guardhouses and guards and cameras and readers because they look like they belong there. We'll understand what we're protecting against. So again, generally, in an enabling function IT scenario, your IT department would be responsible for network architecture and availability. We're talking about the logical network, the computer network, right? On the SRU campus, IT puts up the hotspots, and they make sure that when you jump on the internet and you get into D2L and those things, everything connects, right? They do digital device provisioning. That may be laptops, that may be printers, that may be scanners, that may be cell phones, tablets, all of those things. The planning and provisioning of those devices is part of the IT function. Software, firmware, vetting, and assurance, again, that is more the cybersecurity realm, making sure that you are not introducing things, and they have a gatekeeper, if you will. You can't just find some software you found on the internet at most companies, download it to your company computer and say, wow, this is really cool. I will give you a horror story from just recently. I asked sites around the globe to send me a certain type of information. It happened to be personal and protected information, so there were some places that couldn't provide it, but those that could, I asked them to provide it under a certain format, and one came in a file share that was pulled off the internet. You know, most companies use Dropbox, Box, Teams now, different formats for sending large files securely to each other. But somehow this particular person was able to download this off the internet free, which is always a red flag. If it's free on the internet, then there's something attached to it, either advertising if you're lucky or malware if you're not. But he sent these files in this rogue file share, and immediately we just blasted them away and got that off the network. But somebody missed it, right? There was something that allowed, one of his permissions allowed him to do that. And that's very important because that's how you get viruses on a network. And when you have a big network, that's a problem. IT capital planning. So project management, if the network needs to be replaced, if you need a new backbone, that's a huge IT component and a huge capital component. But even the smaller ones, and when we say IT capital project management, you'll see how that fits into your capital plan as well, because many of the things that physical security people use today reside on a network that belongs to IT. Process automation is one that people tend to forget about, but the machines of the past used to run on pulleys and dials where you set things to certain tolerances. Now they're all computer driven, and process automation, almost everything you can put your hands on today has had some form of computer automation attached to it to produce it, right? From the water bottle, plastic water bottle, to the television set, to the laptop or tablet or phone you're watching this lecture on. Every bit of it has had some form of process to make the physical device, to make the physical product that is computer driven, right? That is why we have better quality, because computers don't make mistakes. They don't set the dial slightly less or slightly more each time. That's why we have more uniformity and better quality in products, quite frankly. And then, of course, cybersecurity, or as I argued, digital integrity. And again, the cybersecurity guys, I hope that this is not looking like a slam. It is not at all. I work very well with cybersecurity people, and I think they're great. But I think we do different things. And understanding that those swim lanes sometimes need to be separate, I think, is an important tool that you take to the workplace. So those are the basic functions of an enabling IT department. Some have more, some have less. Some of these go to other people in some organizations. Sometimes you take on more. But those are the basic functions, and I want to talk about how those basic functions work and then how they fit with us. So as we go through these basic functions, I want you to think about shared risks between physical security, and I'll call it physical security. It really is organizational, industrial, physical personnel, the non-cyber side, right? And IT, and those are plenty, right? There are plenty of shared risks, and there are plenty of shared mitigations. And then I also want you to think of IT as a partner when you talk about investigations, systems, monitoring, those things. How you might have not only shared risks and shared mitigations, but some shared functions that will offer you some cost savings, some time savings, and some work savings. So, start to make that list as we go through on the shared risks and shared mitigations. I think you're getting very skilled at that. But in this particular unit with IT, they are very evident and they are plenty. So network architecture and availability. So new construction is a no-brainer. You're building a new building, right? You're adding on to a manufacturing plant, or you are totally renovating a research or a commercial building. IT is going to be responsible for ensuring the communications, the voice data networks are right-sized. Okay? You don't want to put in a network that could run NASA in an insurance sales office. Okay? They use a fair amount of data, but nothing compared to NORAD, right? I mean, you have to right-size things. Overkill never sells, mainly because it's too expensive. So IT is responsible for planning and installing and right-sizing networks in our facilities. Okay, they're also responsible for the uptime on those networks. So networks go down, right? They're like anything else. Wires break. I've seen networks break outside of data centers because someone with a backhoe just happened to hit the wrong spot and hit a major cable, right? The uptime on those networks and what comes back online first is really something that the continuity plan of IT determines. So if you happen to be working at a hospital, I would venture to say that any computer equipment that operates medical devices like infusion pumps and heart monitors and iron lungs, if those things still exist. I'm not a medical guy, but those things that are direct patient critical, those would be in the continuity plan that IT writes. The first things they bring back online if the network goes down. Last things might be, I don't know, the lighting in the cafeteria, right? The research library's outlets, right? Most hospitals have a small research library of sorts where doctors can go and look stuff up. So they make that continuity plan. And then networks need power, right? So what stays up and running if the power gets cut from the outside, right? Most buildings don't have 100% generated power. Some data centers, big server farms, if you will, have that capability, but the offices around them, that surround that center function, they don't normally have backup power. It's just too expensive to run generators, especially if you have a wide outage of power somewhere. You're relying on fuel, normally diesel fuel, to run generators, right? Very few places have industrial natural gas generators. Those are hugely expensive. One for my house is $10,000. I can imagine what it would be to run an Amazon Web Services data farm, right? It would be hugely expensive. So they run off diesel fuel. And if there's a countywide or a statewide power outage, right? Countywide power outages are not uncommon. Big storms hit everywhere. You're sharing the availability of diesel fuel with other people. So you want to conserve what you have and make it last. So you determine what power comes on and what power doesn't. And IT normally makes those determinations too when it comes to the operation of networks and the availability of things. So I want you to think about some of those and think about some of the shared risks and some of the shared mitigations along those lines, and we'll talk about a few. So next we'll talk about digital device provisioning, right? The maintenance, planning of digital devices. When I talk about digital devices, I'm talking about end user devices. So laptops, desk phones, cell phones, printers, monitors, right? Those types of things. Think about how expensive and how confusing it would be if everybody had what they wanted when it comes to these devices. I happen to work off an Apple laptop. I have a Windows-based laptop as well. My whole family is pretty much Apple, although my daughter uses a Chromebook, right? So, if we had an IT department here, and if there was a problem and they needed to come and work on somebody's laptop, can you imagine the training you'd have to work on all those different operating systems and all those different types of devices? Can you imagine if you went to buy cell phones for everybody, and if you go to Apple and you say, I need a cell phone for all 10,000 of my employees, I want iPhone 10s, and I want these features on them, and I want them all in the color black, you're going to get a sweet deal on those. 10,000 is a nice number to sell for some salesperson. They're all the same. Production is easy, right? No customization. But suppose you came and you said, okay, Apple, I would like to buy 5,000 of your phones, and I would like to buy 5,000 Android phones as well. I want some of them to be Samsung and some of them to be others. And Apple, some of them need to be iPhone 10s and some of them need to be 8s, and I want some of them to be the plus sizes, right? The X's, and I want others to be the smaller sizes. And I need some in pink, and I need some in white. So you're going to pay original retail for those things. So from a cost perspective, and from a maintenance perspective, you need to make sure that you have a standard, right, at your company. Someone has a standard as to what you're going to get. So, if you go into your company, you say, boy, I really love Apple, and happens to be a Windows house, and they buy Lenovo computers. Guess what? You're getting a plain black Lenovo, and you'll like it because it keeps things simple. Just like assembly lines, Henry Ford made the Model T only in the color black, and every one of them was the same. Once you get into customization, you up cost and you up complexity. So IT is the gatekeeper on digital devices and will tell you what you can use. They also then handle the life cycle management. So how often do those devices need to get replaced? Well, they understand how long they last, right? In the industrial setting, your cell phone may last 3 years. Before it is out of date, it can't upload apps that the company needs you to have, right? IT will know that. The end user doesn't need to know that because you'll get a note from your IT department saying it's time to upgrade your cell phone. And if you try to do it before then, no, you're not going to do it because they also have to control that cost. So lifecycle management is a huge item in most IT departments because they are responsible for being the gatekeepers to making sure you get the right device at the right time. And then break-fix response times on digital equipment and on other things, right? If you have a problem with your laptop, if I have a problem with my laptop, I go to a kiosk. I have to drive to a site, or I mail in my laptop, and they will mail me one back. And there's about a 24-hour to 48-hour downtime where I would need to use my tablet or my cell phone to access my work programs, which is not convenient, right? They don't always work. They look hokey on some of those little devices, especially when you have old eyes, right? But break-fix response times, IT helps you determine those, right? They need to understand what's important. If you're in a manufacturing plant and you have a single product plant and you're the only one in the world that makes that product, then those production computers are going to be the first things that get fixed. Immediate response time. You call and say the computer that's operating our manufacturing line for product A, which is medically necessary or a huge moneymaker for the company, then they're going to come and fix that right away. If I call and say my laptop is not working, I have 24 to 48 hour break-fix time on that. So they set those break-fix times, make those decisions based on the criticality of the devices and the equipment to the company. So software, firmware, vetting, and assurance, right? Licensing. I'll tell you that security managers in particular are terrible at making sure that the licenses and the versions are up to date on things that operate access control and camera systems, things like that. You get these little warnings, and it's very commonplace for people to click and forget on the warnings. IT is responsible for making sure that licensing and versions are proper, mostly from the cybersecurity aspect now, because if you're operating off older versions of software, then it doesn't have the inherent and built-in protections that you need. Okay. One of the other things that in big companies you'll find is that I buy a piece of software, or I find one that I need to do my job, and I get it vetted and I purchase it and it gets installed, and then someone else buys one very, very similar to it, but from a different manufacturer. IT, again, is the gatekeeper on that to make sure that an organization doesn't own 3 different types of spreadsheet products, right? Most companies use Excel these days. Lotus Notes used to be out there, I think, or Lotus. There's QuickBooks and there's other products out there. Can you imagine if you had financial information coming across all 3 of those platforms which don't always meld well? So they make sure that you only have one type of tool for each type of job to keep it simple, to make sure that there is harmonization between those tools. And then they bundle those suites of products when it's feasible, and that's really a cost and a complexity thing, right? Would you buy Microsoft Word and QuickBooks? Most likely not. If you're going to buy Word, then you're probably going to buy Excel for your organization, and you're going to have OneNote, you're going to have Teams. You're going to bundle those together for simplicity, and you know that they then work together if you need them to. So again, IT is a gatekeeper on much of what we do in a digital world in most organizations. IT capital project management, pretty simple. Long-term spending on the infrastructure, making sure that your network is not working like a network of 1985, but they need to understand, how often that needs to be dusted off, how often and when to do upgrades, and do you do it in a phased approach where you're doing it building by building on a large campus, or do you shut your company down for a week while you rip the network out? Putting in new network components and upgrading networks is a very complex thing. Normally you're running parallel systems so that everybody can keep working, right? And planning the capital, the money it takes to do that, it's much more expensive. It's easy to shut down someplace, not easy, but easier to shut down someplace, rip out everything and put it in. Think of your home, right? Your home or your apartment. If the landlord or your parents or wherever you happen to live said, okay, here's some money, go live someplace else for a week, make it the Bahamas, right? And when you come back, we'll have ripped out all of the wiring in the house and put in new wiring because it's time to update the electrical here. Okay, you do that. But that's not going to happen, right? Normally when that happens, an electrician's coming in and room by room, they are changing the electric over from one panel to another, and you're living in the house and you have some inconvenience. Well, in a business, you try to limit that inconvenience, and that costs money to do that. So they plan for those projects. And then most important to you is coordination of other functions that have an IT need for major projects. So if you put in a camera system, it's probably going to run, and those of you who've taken my physical security class understand that most camera systems run on the production network of a building, right? They don't have their own backbone anymore. You're not running coax cable from camera back to a VCR like you did in the old days, right? Everything is plug and play on the network. It uses the network wiring and goes to a network recording device. It costs money to do that. So when you have projects, they will coordinate the IT spend that it takes to make those projects come to fruition. A big portion of IT function deals with helping other organizations plan their capital for their digitally related projects. Okay? In process automation, very simply, most processes in manufacturing especially are driven by computers. Could be tied to a server that has a program on it, or just running off a laptop. It's making that saw work, it's making that drill work, it's making that polisher, that labeler, whatever that happens to be, it's done through an automated process, and IT is responsible for making sure those processes are in place and working. Also includes facility support, and most people forget this, and for those of you in computer science that have an interest in engineering, regular civil engineering type functions and facilities management, facility support, building automation systems have come a long way. I mean, you don't set your thermostat anymore, right? The thermostat sets itself. It has sensors and it says when it's too hot and it's too cold, and it does its stuff, right? Lighting systems are PoE lighting systems, power over Ethernet lighting systems these days, so that you can monitor when a light goes out and you can do proactive maintenance. Building automation systems are huge, and they are very huge for security purposes because things like lighting are very important to security, right? Physical security of a building, if that building is completely dark, is awful hard to do. So building automation support is a big IT function in many places, and in many times the security person can co-opt off of those systems as well. And last but certainly not least, cybersecurity or digital integrity, right? The firewalls that protect our information, password protections, access and identity management really is what that is. And the access and identity management features in IT are huge. They really want to understand that you are who you say you are when you're coming into a network. When you physically go into a building, I can have a guard there that checks your identification, that matches your picture with you, that even in some cases you give a fingerprint scan and we match that up with a previous sample that you've given to make sure you are you. In computer programs, that's not necessarily possible. Access and identity management comes from ensuring that you are you by asking you additional questions like two-factor authentication, right? When you try to sign into someplace and it says, are you a robot? And you have to tell them how many streetlights are in a picture. Or when you sign on, they send you a code to your cell phone and you put that code in. So they have a general way to see who you are, right? Very important IT function there. Penetration testing, I won't go a lot into penetration testing, but simply it's a way of testing and attacking software and networks to see if you can get in, see if you can find back doors to get into these things. We have all these firewalls and protections on our networks, but there's always a hole somewhere, and they try to exploit that through penetration testing to know then whether or not that is a vulnerability. And then virus and cyber attack monitoring is the other side of that coin. Not only do you want to make sure that people can't get in, but you want to see how they're trying to get in, and that they may be trying to get in, and what they're trying to get in to do. So you monitor activity going on. And then cybersecurity awareness, something that nobody really thinks about, but is a huge component of IT work, and that is making people aware that the way they act online is important to their own security. If you can get people to practice good security hygiene, then your problems go way down on both sides of the coin, right? If I can get people to not let somebody in a door, right? If I'm the physical security manager and I say no piggybacking at the door, you run your badge and you go in and you make the next person run their badge, and if I can train people to do that, then I have cut way down on the possibility that an outsider is going to piggyback and get into my building. Same thing is true in the cyber world. If you can make people aware that giving out your password even to your best friend isn't a smart idea because you're letting them in, and if your best friend gets fired tomorrow, they still have your password. That cybersecurity awareness and security awareness in general is a huge component of any business, and IT has their function on the cyber side. So I've been rambling on for about a half an hour, and I'm hoping that you've been taking some notes and thinking about, how can you what are some of the shared risks, and what would you do in a shared way to mitigate those risks, right? What are the opportunities? Okay. If you think about the types of services the security manager might use, the IT services, how important is this relationship with IT? And vice versa. And what do you need to do to make sure that this relationship is nurtured and it's a strong one so that you can both benefit from it? So I'm not going to go through every one of those IT functions, but I did pick out two. So let's start with network architecture and availability. We know in new construction, IT is responsible for ensuring the right size of those voice and data networks. If they don't size it correctly, and you have a video system, how good is the quality of those images going to be? And is it going to impact whether you can do your job or not? You could drop video, especially when you need it. I had a case just yesterday where I was reviewing an awful lot of video, and I can say that it was from multiple locations and different IT departments, and I will tell you that one of them gave me the bandwidth I needed. I was looking at HD video, and it was crystal clear, and it was what I needed to prove my case. But the other one I had was grainy, like old bank film you see on TV, where you can't tell anybody from anybody else. And it was directly related because the settings on the NVRs the settings on the recording devices were the same. It was directly related to the quality of the network that they were on. So if it's not sized right, you suffer, right? So there is a shared risk. IT is going to get blamed because they didn't give you enough bandwidth, and you're going to get a lousy product back on your video for investigative purposes. There's a shared risk. Right? Could the surveillance that I'm looking at be a data center? Well, data centers have cameras in them normally, right? You want to make sure that no one is doing anything nefarious in your data center and messing with your computer servers. So the problem that the bad or poorly designed network may create could come back to haunt IT themselves, right? So now there's a shared risk that really skews to the IT side. We need to know who was in there messing with that server. They shut our production down. And you go in, you say, well, based on the camera footage, I know that there was a blob there because the network is not robust enough to give me anything better than that. And it kept dropping out, right? So, IT could take the flak for slow networks, and we're hogging the bandwidth. Is there a shared risk and potentially shared mitigation, right? Discussing what we would do ahead of time before the network goes in and what our needs are? Heck yes. The uptime on the networks, right? When network outages happen, people sometimes misbehave in the cyber world. Let me explain that. Back a long time ago, back in, the ancient dark ages of the 1990s maybe, and early 2000s, we did not have robust wireless networks in most buildings, right? It was still, you plugged into an Ethernet cable on a desktop computer, right? You weren't going wireless on your laptop as you are today in most places. And most homes didn't have a wireless network, right? You plugged in. Well, when wireless networks came out, or even while they were coming out, people got used to them. And if the wireless network went down, which they did quite often in the early days, people would set up their own rogue networks. Anything from now you would potentially use your cell phone for a hotspot. And if it's a company cell phone, it's probably protected. But if you're using your own personal one, that's a problem, right? Company email goes down, and so you start using Gmail to send confidential documents. That's a problem. Back in the old days, people would set up their own wireless networks as backups using, of all things, Pringles cans because they made great antennas, right? And that's a problem, right? Because they're not protected networks, and somebody outside could tap into that Pringles can network and read all your data. So there is definitely a risk, right? It's a risk to physical security because we have devices. That device they tap into could be yours. But we could have a shared mitigation. There are sniffers that will allow you to sniff out rogue networks, and you have security guards walking around. So there is a risk and a shared mitigation, right? Same thing with networks and power, right? Do you want the security system to be the thing that goes down when you lose power? I would suggest not. In fact, power outages have been used as an opportunity for criminals for years. Not just in looting, right? When the power goes out, the great blackout, I forget what year it was, in Detroit, the city was dark for 24 hours, and when the lights came back on, there wasn't much of a city left, at least nothing in the retail space. And we see that happen a lot, right? It's a crime of opportunity. Back in the early 2000s, Bristol Myers Squibb had a warehouse in Connecticut, and there was a power outage, and power fluxes. Actually, power was going in and out and in and out and in and out. And some criminals were setting off the alarms on the security system during all this. It was all confusion. And the police who responded and the security people who were getting the alarms and sending the police decided, look, this is just a function of the power outage, right? This is the power's fluxing on and off. The alarms are coming in. The cameras are blinking on and off. It's just a mess. There's nothing going on. Well, it come to find out that there were criminals there at that warehouse, and they escaped with about $200 million worth of product, and insult to injury used the forklifts in this warehouse because the keys were left in them, and they were charged to load up their trucks full of pharmaceutical goods and take off. So, power is important, right? Backup power and having that plan. There's a risk in power outages, certainly to IT and certainly to physical security. The shared mitigation could simply be that when there's a power outage at a building with a certain amount of value, be that product value or operational value, that physical security sends guards and patrols and has an agreement with a guard company to send in people right away to cover that area to guard against things like theft. Shared risk of power outages, shared mitigation of guard service, and in turn, IT will be bringing that particular building's security system up first amongst those things that they have to do. So there's just some of them in the network and architecture space, and then we'll look at one more. So cybersecurity. Since we have so many cybersecurity majors, I wanted to look at some of the potential sharing opportunities, shared risk, shared mitigation opportunities. So identity management is both physical and logical, right? I mean, you need to know who's getting into your computer network, and I need to know who's getting into my building. We both have an identity management issue. If I use perhaps fingerprints, use fingerprint readers to get people into a building, then I have normally not a sample of the fingerprint. I won't get too technical for some, but it is a digitized version. It is an algorithm, right? When you register your fingerprint, it turns it into a number, a code number. Could I not share that code number with the folks in IT? And many computers today have a thumbprint reader on them, right? They have a biometric reader of some kind. Could you not use your identity badge to slide into a reader in a laptop? Yeah, that's even old technology, frankly. People are kind of getting away from the smart chip technology that way, but it works. And it's a shared opportunity because there's a shared risk of someone purporting to be to be somebody other than who they are, right? So could we share that type of thing, a shared mitigation? Absolutely. Penetration testing. Well, let's talk about edge devices, right? Edge devices are things that from a layman's perspective. Again, cybersecurity people, you could probably turn circles around my definition, but it's simply something that is a wireless or even a wired device, quite frankly, that sits on the edge of the network, sits on the user end of the network, right? So I have Amazon Dot devices in my home, right? That's an edge device. It is a vulnerability. Somebody could potentially try to get into my home network using that device because it sits on the far reaches, right? It's at the end of the line of a device, just like our TVs today that have listeners in them, and you can tap into it. There's something that you can pick up on from the outside, right? Well, let me tell you something. Cameras, security cameras that hang on a building are edge devices. And I will share something else with you. And if you've been in my physical security class, you've heard this before. The passwords on them, if you can take a picture of a camera, I can probably tell you what the password is because it's the default password that the manufacturer put on, and it is online with the documentation. When you run cut sheets on that camera to see, what the technical specs are, it will tell you default password, camera 123, or ABC 123, or camera 1, right? They give a default password. Those are seldom changed. And so penetration testers can get into cameras a lot, right? It is a very frequent way to get in. You're not trying to embarrass the person on the other side. And if you're doing that, you're in the wrong game, okay? But it's a horror story for the network because once you get into those cameras, you are into the network. Now you've got to get beyond other things, granted, but you're in that conduit, you're in that pipeline, and now you just got to find your way around and look for vulnerabilities, and you're doing it from the inside, not the outside. Shared risk? Heck yes, my camera system has been compromised, so now people can see inside my facility and know where my priority resources are, know how often people go to them. They can survey an area for a couple of days and know that nobody goes to that area where I store controlled drugs, gold bars, new TVs, cigarettes, whatever you want to steal. Nobody goes there between midnight and 8 a.m. because it's set on autopilot, right? There's one guard sits in the front, nobody's doing rounds, and nobody's going to disturb it. Now I know on camera, and then I can also use the camera system to watch from the outside to know when the guard may be coming, and I can alert my person inside with a cell phone just saying, okay, get out, they're on their way, right? Definitely a risk. Shared mitigation, putting a program onto those cameras that automatically generates a password change. There are cloud services that do that. IT can suggest that to a security manager, and now we have cleaned up both that edge device vulnerability that IT has to worry about, right? Because it's a conduit into the network, and we've cleaned up the whole security problem with camera security. So now we're looking at our ESRM family again. We've determined that security obviously has a place in an enterprise security risk management model, right? As the subject matter expert, HR, we have shared risks, we have some shared mitigations, and they have some unique risks which we as subject matter experts can suggest ways to mitigate. Finance, and our unit on finance, I apologize to the business majors in the class. My finance lesson was probably much like elementary reading, but many security managers have no financial background when they hit the job. And so we wanted to cover the basics, and that's exactly what we did. It may have sounded very simple or even overly simple to many, but it is, this is a survey course. So in security management, you need to have that basic knowledge. And then IT, again, same way with cybersecurity and computer science majors in the class. Oversimplification? Sure. But the understanding is that we have shared risks, and we can have shared responses, and those mitigations can help us both and to protect the overall enterprise. But if we don't talk to IT, and IT does not talk to physical security about some of these things, look, one of the things that I didn't even talk about was the fact that server rooms, data centers, teledata hubs, those rooms that contain the the computer equipment that make a business run these days, can't sit out in an open area. One person going by and even bumping a wire can shut you down for a day. And so there needs to be physical security on those rooms, and that's a shared risk, shared mitigation opportunity in and of itself. So definitely IT has a seat at the table with HR, finance, and us. And the list will grow. And we're not going to go too much farther. We have one more unit, I believe, on a on a function that I want to go over, and that's engineering and facilities, because security managers play very closely with that group as well. But I think you're seeing now that if you have these relationships with these other partners, these other family members, I'm going to call them at this point, right? To understand what their risks and their vulnerabilities are, you can actually protect the enterprise rather than just be a security manager who throws up basic protections and hopes for the best. So we're coming to the end here. This week's deliverables, the lecture, you did it, right? The reading this week has some Homeland Security, Department of Homeland Security documents. They really are ESRM, I'll call it undercover, right? They're not calling it that, but in many ways it is, with a bit of a twist on it. And we're going to have a discussion this week, and it's a true academic discussion, which means there's no right or wrong answer. It's your opinion, but you have to be able to support your opinion, right? Discussions due Thursday at 5 p.m. I'm going to try to put that in the calendar, but D2L is squirrely about that, putting things in the calendar unless they're assigned to a grade or an actual stop. And I can't have you write the discussion, have it stop on Thursday, then reopen it to put in discussions. So it's going to say your discussion is due at Sunday at midnight. That's true with the responses, but the initial post is due Thursday at 5 p.m. And I'm going to try as much as I can to remind people, but I've noticed that that people have trouble with that. Your discussions are always going to be due on Thursday at 5, your initial discussion, so that there's a couple of days for people who, frankly, don't care to work on the weekend, and I'm not going to force anyone to work on the weekend if that's not what they do, right? Everybody needs their downtime. They want to get their work done. They need to have time to get in and do their responses as well. And I think that's fair to everybody. So this true academic discussion is just a little different, and it's something that that'll make you think. So what you're going to read about in the DHS documents is a facility security committee model, and essentially it is ESRM in a form where the different functions, and they set the functions, right? Who's coming to this committee table, and there is an open discussion about the true risks to a facility that DHS has. Now, DHS has facilities all over the world, and the risks are different all over the world. The risk in their office in Grand Rapids, Michigan is totally different than their risk in Detroit, mainly because of the protest activities that are happening now. Grand Rapids is not notorious for protests, although we have had some, but Detroit is notorious for protests, and frankly, this go-round in the last year or so, they've been less violent and less impactful, but they would need different physical security protections at one building versus another. Again, think about the Western Pennsylvania DHS office, I'm sure there is one, versus the one in Philly. Different protections, different threats, different vulnerabilities based on population, based on all different things, right? DHS forms these committees and brings people in. Now, one of the things that I want you to note when you read the article is how they determine what risks are important. And that is done by vote. That, to me, is a vulnerability in and of itself. And I'll tell you why. If I'm the security manager and I rely more on IT than I do on HR for things, because of the typical organization I have, then I am likely to yield to the IT person's whims, right? What they want is what I want because I need them for certain things. It's a forced cooperation model, which is in some ways good, but it also has some vulnerabilities because it's a vote. And the security manager, as the subject matter expert, may understand how I can take a single set of risks and put one mitigation in place and solve them. And collectively, I've covered a big hole, right? Because it's a little problem for everybody, and I just fixed it with one mitigation. But if it's not voted on that way, then I may spend my time doing things that are less impactful. And so, is it easy to miss big risks and favor those? Maybe. Would you use this model if you were a security manager outside of DHS where it's forced? So if you're a security manager at a company or organization, would you use this model? There are some advantages and disadvantages, and if not, what type of model would you use? I usually do this discussion later after we do the unit on engineering and facilities, which is a powerful player and handles a lot of capital, right? My contention here is that when we sit down in a facility security committee model where everyone gets an equal vote, There are some. It's like the old adage from Animal Farm, the George Orwell book, which many of you probably read in junior high school. You know, it's a book on communism. All animals are equal. Some animals are more equal than others. And in this case, there are some players who will hold the purse strings for the security manager or for others, and it may influence the way people vote on actual risk. So that's just my opinion, but yours may be different. You may say, no, this is a great model, and nobody's wrong. You just have to support your argument. And so in the discussion, same type of format we've been using. Don't get hung up on the APA. I really want you guys to try APA, and I want you to use some references, not always the lecture. The reading obviously will be a reference in this, right? The DHS article needs to be cited because you're going to be using it as the basis for your discussion. Practice writing some of those references, right? Don't worry about a cover page. Don't worry about headers and footers. You can't really do that in D2L. But proper paragraphs, separate your thoughts, use some references and cite them in the text, and then cite and use your reference at the end. That's what I'm really looking for from you in that. So this will be an open discussion, but it will require some thought. When you do your responses for this discussion, I want you to find somebody who disagreed with what you said, somebody whose opinion is different than yours. Again, these are mostly opinions. I think that we should have a pure physical security committee model at any business because it allows everyone to have an equal voice. Or I believe that the facility security committee model is flawed because some players have more influence over other players based on finances, based on the way they support them, and that may influence votes. I think it's doesn't work because the security manager has very little say in what in the ranking of risks, which in the pure ESRM model is a security function. So there are many arguments, and there are 20, 30 more. Right? It's okay to disagree. You need to learn to do it respectfully. So these are real discussions saying, yeah, I totally agree with you. I think you did a great job. I especially like when you said XYZ. Not going to cut it because this time you have to find somebody, right, who disagreed with you, and you have to tell them why you said what you said and why you think what they said may not be the best answer. And then you need to learn to do that in a very collegial and friendly and respectful way, and then you respond in the same way. So there it is. As a security manager, working with IT is hugely important, just as it is with HR and finance. And next week we'll talk a little bit about engineering and facilities. Huge opportunities, huge information that can come from these partners, and especially the opportunity to find out what the risks may be, whether they're shared by others, which makes them even more impactful to the business, and then figuring out a way to mitigate those risks, hopefully with less activities, right? That shared mitigation. If you can find one thing that solves two people's problems, that's a big bonus, right? But in the ESRM model, as a security manager, and security management for us this first half of the semester is all about enterprise security risk management and how we work with others and how we learn what others do. I think that this is a great opportunity to stop and say, okay, what models are out there? And that's what we're going to do in the discussion. So I hope you found that to be helpful. Call, text, write, email if you want to discuss anything about the course. Anything. Places where you think it could be improved. Places where you think it's good and we shouldn't make any changes. I want to hear from people as we go along. I can't make this a better course for you if I don't have some really quick feedback. At the end of the semester, it's great, and I try to incorporate those things at the end of the semester, but it's too late for you at the end of the semester, so speak up now if you think something ought to be changed. If you are missing assignments, and there are a number of people who are missing assignments, look, it's not too late to get back on the horse, right? But if you wait till after the midterm, it gets progressively harder to do anything about that. If you are missing an assignment, now's the time to discuss a plan for that. The plan may be, let's let it go, right? There are some people who are missing assignments, and I have had discussions with them and said, let's let the assignment go for now. And if at the end of the semester, doing that assignment, you're going to take a hit for it being late anyway, and that hit's not going to change. If doing that assignment, calculating in the hit you'll take for being late, makes a difference between an A and a B, or B and a C, or C and a D, then by all means, we'll do it then. If it's not going to make a difference numerically, then maybe you want to just say, look, I'll take that hit, that zero, because mathematically it's not going to help me. Academically, sure, I want you to do all of your work. I mean, that's a given. But let's be realistic about it. But if you are missing assignments, we need to discuss a plan now. You can't come back to me at the end of the semester, say, well, I missed assignment number 2, Dr. Wisniewski, so I'd like to turn that in now and take the hit. If we haven't discussed it, that's not an option. We need to have that plan set so that we both know that may be coming. So now's the time to have those conversations. And I am open to those conversations. With that, we're at 55 minutes. I've gone way too long. Have a great week. I'm really looking forward to the discussions this week. And I'm really looking forward to seeing your opinion about how the Facility Security Committee in the government works and how you think it may be improved. Have a great week, everybody.